Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to this FP&A Trends Webinar, where today we're going to be looking at From Insights to Impact, Unveiling the Potential of FP&A Scenario Management. My name is Hans Gobin. I'm the FP&A Trends Ambassador, and I'll be your facilitator today. And I am very proud to say that today we have over 350 people joining us from over 46 countries around the world. So it's going to be a great webinar. So what is on our agenda today? So we're going to look at the latest trends in scenario management to start off with. Then we'll look at best practice strategies for effective decision making as far as scenario management is concerned, implementing scenario management, insights, practical insights and examples. And finally, we'll close the presentation session going through how you can transform your scenario management by using cutting edge technology. We will do some conclusions and recommendation, and we will finish off today's webinar with the fantastic Q&A session that we have running. So a lot in 60 minutes. Now is a good time for me to introduce our esteemed panelists. So panelists, if you can join us on the webcam, please, and go off mute as well. And I will start by introducing our first panelist. Our first panelist today is Massimo Carrao, who is CFO at the Veganz Group AG, based in Berlin, Germany, where he's joining us from today. And he will be talking about scenario management in practice, strategies for effective decision making. Massimo, great to have you on the panel today.
It's a pleasure, Hans. Thanks for having me.
Thank you very much. Our next presenter will be Milind Karnik, who is head of FP&A, pricing and profitability, commercial banking at Citizens. Milind is based in New York metro area, where he's joining us from today, and he will take us through how to implement scenario management, some practical insight, and lots of examples as well. Milind, very welcome.
Hans, thanks for having me.
Brilliant. And finally, we move on to Ben. Our third panelist is Ben Page, Vice President Solution Consulting at Planful, based in Illinois in United States. And today he'll take us through the role of cutting edge technology in transforming your scenario management. Ben, great to have you again with us.
Thanks, Hans. Great to be here.
Brilliant. Thank you very much, panelists. As you can see, we've got three fantastic panelists, lots of insights and presentation awaiting us. But panelists, in the meantime, if I can ask you to switch off your camera and go on mute while I go through some housekeeping. So the first thing for me to do is to introduce our technology sponsor for today, who is Planful. We all know Planful, leading FP&A software platform. Thank you, Planful, for sponsoring this event. Moving on very quickly, a little bit of FP&A trends stats to share with you. We have now done 252 FP&A board around the world since 2016. We are, I think, in 33 cities now. So come and join us in any of these cities. And as today we are doing lots of webinars, 161 in total since March 2008. FP&A Trends Survey, I will be sharing some on scenario management shortly. We have over 2,500 plus respondents. Lots of research papers as well, 27. Our LinkedIn group keeps growing, 50,000 plus. Knock on our website or click on our website is way above 500,000. And finally, just in case you didn't know, we also have a AI and ML FP&A committee. And we've been meeting since 2016 to discuss advancement in AI. And we have had 24 meetings. So please come and join us in any one of these. Now, this is for our audience and for those who've joined us for the first time, as well as our regulars. It is an hour's webinar today. Your participation is very much required. We will be doing two polling questions. We know what the panelists are doing. We will hear from them, but we also want to hear from you. What are you doing in your organization? So please vote when I do the voting round. Of course, we've got a Q&A interactive session towards the end. We would like you to send your questions via the chat box here on the tool. So please send your questions. If you've got some burning questions on scenario management, you can ask right now if you wish, or wait till our speakers have spoken and then ask any question relevant to their presentation and tell us who you want to answer as well. The presentation is available for you to download right now in the handout section if you wish to do so. If not, you will definitely receive a copy and the link to the recording after we close the session via email. That will be. So once I close the session, you will get a pop-out survey or feedback session that pops out. It'll take 30 seconds to a minute of your time. Very valuable to us. Please give us your a bit of an insight as to how we did, but also tell us what would you like to hear from us in the next few sessions. So that was me on the housekeeping. Let me take you through the latest trends in scenario management. Quite a bit coming from our FP&A Trends survey. Very quickly here, timeline to run scenarios. So what we're looking at here is how many organizations, when we surveyed, could run scenario planning in real time. It was around 22%. But starkly, we noticed that 21% were unable to run scenarios, and 4% did not see the value in running scenarios. So some stark percentages there. What is then the biggest issue in planning and forecasting and stopping us from doing this? A lot about data, 30%, lack of single trusted data source, complexity of data, 18%, inconsistency in data definition. Excel comes in at 14%, timeliness of receiving data as well. I am just going to run through this very quickly, but please have a look at it in detail when you get a chance. And then here it's what sort of tools are we using to do scenario planning, and what is the success rate in using those in terms of how quickly we can do them. So you can see there cloud-based platforms, homegrown solutions, spreadsheets, all the generation tools as well. So a lot of organizations there use a lot of very different methods, but all of them can do real-time scenario planning by the looks of it. Of course, it decreases by what platform you're using, how old they are, if you're using spreadsheet or not as well. Now, the good news is that scenario planning is one of the top 5 priorities for FP&A transformation in 2024. So organizations are going to spend time and money in making sure their scenario planning is at the cutting edge. If they're not doing it, they will be doing it as well. And finally, just let me leave you with this. This is FP&A Trends Scenario Management Ecosystem. What do you need to create a best scenario management ecosystem? Again, I will let you read through this in your own time. And if you need to feedback, you could go to our website as well to see more detail. So that's all from me. What I would like to do now is to introduce our first speaker, who is Massimo Garau, CFO at Veganz Group, who is going to talk to us about strategies for effective decision making. Over to you, Massimo.
Thank you, Hans. Today, I would like to offer a framework as to how to include scenario management within your planning exercise and possibly motivated to use it also as an instrument to support your strategic decision-making process. But first of all, let me try to answer the question of why we need a scenario management at all. Well, I list a couple of reasons on this slide, but basically it all comes down to the fact that the world is changing and doing so at a much faster pace than we were used in the recent past. technology, regulations, the roles of stakeholders, just to name a few. And what this causes is the fact that the possible outcomes of all these scenarios increase exponentially, and at the same time, the predictable time span gets shorter and shorter. So in this environment, scenario management can be used as both a proactive and a reactive measure, and both for positive as well as negative outcomes, because at the end of the day, we're not only here to avoid risks, but we can also use it in order to identify and grasp opportunities when they become available. So on the next slide, I would like to point out that scenario management is not just a finance exercise or looking into a crystal ball into the very distant future, but it actually interests the whole organization, all functions within an organization, also some very operational aspects. And actually on the next slide, I would like to give you some examples of how this happens and how the different parts of the organization can be affected. For example, when I think of strategic scenario management applications, I think of themes such as technology breakthroughs. For example, artificial intelligence is the word of the day, is still perceived by some, I believe, as little more than a curiosity or maybe a tool for financial reporting. But actually, I believe it has the potential to radically transform every industry, although now we are in a phase where maybe the role of artificial intelligence is a little bit played down. But think of industries such as healthcare, education, where it is still pretty much at an embryonic stage. So the point is not trying to predict what role it will play. The point is trying to be ready depending on what comes up at the end of the day. Another possible reason for strategic scenario management is the implementation of policy changes. I think back to the 80s, when Italy abandoned nuclear power generations, or Germany did the same at the beginning of this century. I think as at effects such as Brexit, what it meant for the companies, for the corporations in the UK, but also in the other countries, and in the rest of Europe, for example, strongly affected by that. Who could have thought that just a couple of years before? If we come to a more short-term view of things, there are some predictable actions or predictable scenarios that where we have more effect in our own hands, such as, for example, product launches that can deeply affect our financials, or the landscape or changes at our customers. In both cases, what I find personally very useful is thinking in terms of concentration of our revenues, still better of our profits, on the products we offer. I mean, how much share of our turnover of our profit do we realize with certain products, or how important are certain customers for our P&L. Think of Apple, $400 billion turnover, 46% of it with one product line. That makes about 160 billion a year, if I calculate correctly. What can it mean for the company? And the same for the concentration of customers. Think of the retail environment, for example, in my home country in Germany, quite a concentrated retail environment. What happens if one of them would become whatever liquidity issue? These are just a few indicators that you may want to keep under control and possibly be ready with some scenario management if it should materialize. Last but not least, you can have also short-term applications of scenario management that really concern us on a daily basis. Things, for example, of the issue of shifts planning in production, if you want to accommodate a rapidly change in demand from your customers, or some short-term activities. that you want to implement on the marketplace. Now, having talked about the whys and wheres of the applications of scenario management, I would like to conclude my presentation with the next slide with a few simple steps of how you can implement such a process. As a first step, I recommend identifying the key drivers of your business. Don't just look at your industry or similar companies that you know are following a similar process. Think specifically of your own company, because at the end, every company is different, and you should do the exercise for yourself in order to have the best benefit from it. I believe the drivers you should use for this exercise are no more than 3. I think it's still okay if you use 4. If you come up with 12, though, then I think you should think again, seriously. Second point, think of some possible scenarios for your drivers. I mean, how could they evolve? Again, my recommendation is not that you try to predict them. I think sometimes reality is more fantasy than we believe. And the second recommendation would be to think not in incremental steps of +1%, -1%, but think of radically different futures. Because at the end, the likelihood of they materializing is higher than we would have thought. As a third stage, I would say try to develop the scenarios up to the level of detail where you can reasonably quantify the effects. Try to attach always a price tag to each scenario that you have identified. And finally, translate it into financial figures for all your relevant KPIs so that you can appreciate how your P&L, how all your financial statements would look like if these scenarios would materialize. This was my last slide. I conclude my presentation. I thank you for your attention and hand over to Hans.
Massimo, thank you very much. Great presentation, and the way you link to strategic, financial, and operational, and the different examples there was really, really good. I think we need to consider all different aspects at all time as well. Thank you very much for that. I think we've heard from you. What's important now for us is also to understand what our audiences are doing as far as scenario planning is concerned as well. So I've just launched the poll. So we would like to know, how advanced is your scenario planning? First, we do not use scenario planning. Secondly, simple Excel-based scenario planning. Third, Excel-based but automated driver-based. And finally, multi-dimensional scenario management. So please vote. How advanced is your scenario management? We do not use scenario management. Simple Excel-based scenario, Excel-based or automated driver-based model, and finally, multi-dimensional scenario planning. So I'll give it another couple of minutes, please. Sorry, not minutes, seconds for you to vote. And I'm now going to close the poll and share the result. Whoops, sorry. I've just missed on sharing the results. Go back 1 second. Right, a little bit of a mishap there. Massimo, what did you think of the session? What are your thoughts
I don't see the results actually.
Yeah, no, I think we've share again.
Okay.
There we go.
Now I do.
Yeah.
Yes.
Sorry.
Okay. Well, surprise, surprise. Excel accounts for about 90% of the answers. So that's reasonable. I would have not expected anything else. In a very simple form, I think that's okay. That's okay. And we don't use scenarios. That would be very interesting for me to understand why. And there is 5%, which is a lot more advanced with multidimensional scenario management. But yeah.
I think one comforting thing to see for me here, Massimo, is that only 7% do not
Yeah.
use scenario. But of course, very heavily Excel based, as you were saying.
Mhm.
So we want people to potentially move to the next stage and use multi-dimensional scenario management
Mhm.
tools. So that would be great. So thank you very much for that, Massimo, and apologies for not sharing the outcome there. Let us now go to the next section where we ask the other panelists to come and join us. We've got a question here from Massimo that he would like to put to the other panelists. And it goes like this: does scenario management require a change in mindset throughout the organization? And for that, we go to Milind first. Milind, what would your thought be? Milind, I think you're there. We go.
Yeah, thanks, Had. I think to this question, the way I think about it is we do need to embed it within the organization. And then as we start a scenario planning exercise, we do need to engage our business partners and we need to think through what level do we need to embed it in the organization? Do we need to be sort of high level with line of business, senior management? Do we need to engage the CEO? I think it depends on which level, how big the scenario change is we are contemplating. But I would agree that it does require mindset change through the organization, and you need to prepare the organization to think through different scenarios and think through different probabilities and possibilities of what might happen.
Fantastic answer there. Thank you very much, Milind. Ben, can we come to you, please?
Yeah, I think just fundamentally, if you're really going to optimize it, then it needs to be an organizational change, not just an individual change. Otherwise, you've still just got finance handing budgets out to people. So, for that to be successful, for that to be adopted within the organization, it's going to have to require an organizational change in thought process.
Great answer there. And let's go back to Massimo for him to just wrap this up. Massimo, your thoughts?
I think we all agree about that. Definitely needs changing mindset throughout the organization, in the whole organization. And for me, the first step to achieve it is to really appreciate the role of uncertainty nowadays. It's bigger and bigger. And therefore, the comfort zone of everything that we have done in the last 30 years, that it will automatically work for another 30 years, I think we should abandon that. And that is where scenario management, I think, can help taking a different view of things. And again, it's not the focus on trying to predict what will happen, but it's just the focus on trying to be ready for whatever happens.
Absolutely. And we've gone through so many different uncertainties over the year. That's not stopping anywhere near now. So it's being prepared, as you mentioned.
Yeah.
So, panelists, thank you very much for answering the question. Let us move now to our next session, who will be delivered by Milind Karnik, who is head of FP&A at Citizens. Milind, over to you. I will turn my webcam off. Ready when you are.
Thanks. Thanks for having me, Hans and team. Let me walk everyone through a few times when we've had to implement scenario planning across different organizations that I've been in. Uh, I would say what I've put in this slide is really the big ones, or what we call the black swan events. I think a lot of us go through small scenarios. What happens if this changes or that assumption changes. But I thought I'd talk through some of the big events that have happened over the last few years and how do we think about it. So I would say the biggest one that's happened in the recent past has really been COVID. And I think the challenge with COVID was it just caused so many different dimensions in terms of what could change or what could go wrong, that I don't know that it wasn't an easy scenario to run. I think the organization I was in at that time ran it pretty well, and I think we covered it well. But as you go through, you see that, oh, I should have thought through this driver. I should have thought through X, Y, and Z linkage to economic scenarios and so on. So I would say of all the scenarios, this one was probably the most challenging to run. I would say the next one was really the Great Recession in 2008, 2009. At that time, we moved the different economic variables and said, what happens if unemployment goes up? What happens if the Dow falls another 10% or 20%? How does that change things like mark to market? How does it change credit losses? And I think it was really important for us to work through the organization to make sure people thought through event connectivity. So what happens if, when went under, or when Bear Stearns was going through its challenges? How do you think about mark to market? How do you think about correlations that you might not have thought before? And how do you bring that in with interest rates? And the other one I've been through quite a lot, and sometimes it's pretty ongoing, is what happens with a product success or a product failure. And I think in most cases we do a scenario about what happens if something doesn't happen. In my experience, we've not done too many in terms of success. So if something turns out to be a bigger success than what we thought, how do we pivot? I think in general, management always wants to have a backup plan and a contingency plan to say what happens if things don't go well. How do we pivot? And how do we think about staffing, marketing spend? How do we think about our P&L and so on? And then lastly, I would say the other time things have been really volatile have been in the last 2 or 3 years, especially when the Fed started hiking rates. I think that caused a lot of unexpected correlations in terms of activity levels, in terms of business drivers. So for me, the key in this one was really getting our businesses to think through what are the expected correlations, and also think through some of the unexpected correlations, if you may. Just moving to the next slide, I thought it would be interesting to sort of talk through why do we need scenario planning. Whenever someone's asked me to run a scenario or do something, I've always thought, what is the reason that we're doing this? And I think it's really important that when you're at a senior level and you're the one cascading the scenario through the organization, you think about why we're doing it, and you communicate that why really clearly. So to me, the primary reason is really contingency planning. And I know there's a big focus on expenses, but really, if COVID is impacting us, what are the expenses we can cut quickly, for example? I think that's probably the biggest take. Do we put in place? Do we stop any hiring for now? How long do we put things on pause? Is there any discretionary expense we can cut? Are we having some events? Do we have travel 6 months out? How much of those can be cut or flex? And then what do you need to be prepared for? And I would say losses. As unemployment ticks up, how do you think about credit losses, for example? I think, and in which areas? I think that's probably one of the things that needs a fair amount of thinking. I would say in each of the scenarios I talked about, they were historically a little different than anything that's happened in the past. So what you need to do is not just think through your regular model, but what are the different possibilities that could happen? And then I would sort of think about the others as, how do we think about flexibility? What's the first thing we do? What's the second thing we do? And I think a lot of this is really around organization responsiveness and preparedness. How quickly can we pivot from one scenario to another? How do we move from one decision to another? And then I would say finally, it's really important for us to have a playbook as an organization, and to say, okay, if this happens, this happens, this is when I'm going to trigger these actions. I'm going to cut spending. I might decide to raise capital. I might actually decide to dividend if I realize that people aren't borrowing as much and I don't need that capital. So it's really having a playbook that we can respond to if things get better or worse. And then I thought For the next slide, I would just talk about being really practical and saying, if I need to run a scenario, and generally I feel like the bigger the organization, the more complex it is to run scenarios. So if you need to run a scenario, what are the steps you should take, and how do you think through it? I would say my first step really is, and I'd start on the right, which is you need to get senior management ownership. You need the CEO, the CFO to buy into what you're doing, and you need to make sure that they are direct reports and their communication buys into it, so that they know why we're doing it, how we're doing it, not so much the how, but why we're doing it and what results to expect. And then the second consideration I've always had is, once I've got CFO, CEO buy-in, is really thinking about, is this something that we can manage in a rolling forecast, or do we need to just run it as a special scenario and keep it on the side? And then I've always thought about the next one really deeply, which is, do we need to keep it centralized, or do we need to push it lower level? And personally, having sort of come through the FP&A ranks, I've always had a great affinity towards the lower level, because I know when we think about doing something and we think it's simple, when you push it down the organization, it gets more and more complex. So I've always debated this, at least myself and with our larger team, about how deep do we need to push it. And then I sort of think about the turnaround time. How quickly do we want it? Generally, we do want things very quickly. And then just moving to the left-hand side, just thinking about, do we need to think about it, do we need this data systemic, or do we need it offline? I would say, if this is a big scenario, if this is a big change, so like COVID, the Great Recession, some of the interest rate changes, products haven't worked out, we do want it to be systemic. I think having it offline in Excel spreadsheets just creates more and more issues as you go through, as time passes. And then finally, I would say, what is the level of detail we need? Do we need to do it at a really detailed level? How do we leverage existing economic and driver-based models? I would say in each of the cases I gave, those are sort of the more black swan events, if you may. So you might want to consider, do your economic and driver-based models cover these scenarios? And then lastly, I would say, I think very clearly that, do I need to give people a very specific guidance? Do I need to tell them, hey, make sure you look at the correlation between unemployment, for example, and credit losses? Or do you need to look at GDP growth versus business activity? So I would always lean on very specific guidance. Need not be formal, but I think informally communicating that these are sort of the changes I would like to see, or that we are expecting, I think is really helpful. Uh, that's it from me, Hans. I'll turn it back over to you.
Milind, thank you very much. Great presentation. And of course, lots and lots of tips and tricks about what we should be thinking when we do scenario management. We've now heard from you and Massimo. Let's go to our second polling question and look at what our audiences are doing. So launching the poll now, ladies and gentlemen, please vote. How long does your scenario planning process take? We saw that before in terms of the survey. So can you run it in real time? First one, scenarios are run in less than 1 day. Scenarios normally take a week to run. We can run them, but it is very time consuming. And finally, we are unable to run any scenarios whatsoever. So ladies and gentlemen, if you can vote, please. So yes, we can run them real time, first option. Second option, we can run them in less than a day. Scenarios normally take a week to run. We can run them, very time consuming. And finally, we are unable to run them. So let me now end the poll and share the results. So Milind, what we see here is 6% can run it in real time, 12% less than a day, 44% takes a week, 25% can run it, time consuming, unable to run 13%. What are your thoughts on this, Milind?
I think this is actually the way I'd have expected it to be. I don't think this is a surprise. I think you do want to take some time to run a scenario because you do need to think through it. And I think part of the work in running a scenario plan, it's probably one of the more interesting things you do in FP&A, right? Is you think through a scenario. It's not all busy work. It's more heads up work versus heads down, where you're not just running a model, you're thinking through the interactions and so on. So the fact that it takes a week to run or longer, I think it's good to sort of see that. I'm actually really impressed by people who run scenarios really quick and in real time. I think that's a great sort of success to have. I would just caution people who run scenarios quickly is to make sure you be cautious and you think through whether the scenarios you've run, how deep are they? Do they account for all the correlations? Are the questions you're being asked sort of outside the norm? Do they fit the models we have?
Yeah, absolutely spot on there, Milind. Thank you very much. A brilliant answer there. Let us close this now and let us go to our second discussion question where I will ask the panelists to join us. But before I read it, let me just quickly remind our audience, ladies and gentlemen, please send us your question via the chat box. We've got quite a few already. We would like to hear more from you. We will try and answer some of them right now on the panel. Those we can't answer will be answered to you directly via email. So rest assured, all of them will get answered. So moving on, what are the steps we can take to reduce the time we spend on scenario management? Because a lot of people tend to spend a lot of time, as we've just seen. So let's have some thought from Massimo there, please.
Well, I think exercising is a good way to start. Keep doing it. I guess the first time is the most difficult one because you will have some trial and errors to do. But once you've done it properly, then I think it would help if you update it regularly. If you just prove whether your assumptions are still valid, whether your organization has changed, and whether you will be able to adapt to certain scenarios in the same way that you had predicted at the time. So keep it in small steps, but do it regularly.
Absolutely.
Would be my recommendation.
Very, very good. Thank you, Massimo. Ben, over to you. Your
Yeah,
thoughts?
I think the other thing is just you can't do everything, right? It was like the classic problem with the budget is it just took too much time because you're asking everybody to look at every single element. So find out the 3 or 4 things that create the most risk, and focus on those. Don't spend a lot of time on the things that are not value add. So really just identify the things that are critical to your business and focus your energies there.
Brilliant. Thank you for that, Ben. Milind, circling back to yourself, your thought on this?
Thanks. I actually really like Massimo's response. I think taking the small steps and sort of doing a little bit of training to make sure you are able to respond when that happens, I think that's a great suggestion. And again, I would just tell all the participants that this is the interesting part of FP&A, right? We rarely get asked to do scenarios and so on. We run budgets, forecasts, and so on, and it's a normal process. So this is good, interesting time spent. So I would say lean into it and definitely uh, try and think through what is needed to run a good scenario. So think about it analytically as well as practically.
Brilliant. 3 great answers there. Thank you very much, panelists. Thank you very much for that. Let us now move on to our next session. So delivering that is, of course, Ben Page, who's the Vice President Solution Consulting at Planful. Over to you, Ben, whenever you're ready.
All right, thanks, Hans. I think, when you're thinking about the process, then you also have to think about technology. So you can't just have one or the other. You have to have a process, but you're probably going to need something to enable that process. I was Not totally surprised to see that 89% of the respondents are still using Excel. I think sometimes the challenges that people encounter are because of Excel. And so the area that I would propose from a technology standpoint is just like the other gentleman had mentioned, we want to exercise our process. We want to get into the habit of doing things more repetitively. So increasing your cycle times. And what I mean by that is if you're today doing an annual plan and a half year forecast, maybe you'd like to get into quarterly rolling. If you're already at quarterly rolling, then start thinking about possibly monthly. Increasing the cadence, increasing those cycles. And I do think that Massimo said something that was really critical. The act is not to just do it. The act is to be prepared for when things happen. Um, and so by increasing those scenarios, you're going to have that available at your disposal. So if you saw Black Swan event A, then you would be able to have something to refer back to. If you're looking and saying, oh, wow, we're just coming out of a situation where interest rates were high and now they're talking about possible recessions, do you have that information available to you? And what are the things that you're going to do to drive your business? Look at those volatile items. If you're in a organization that's heavily leveraged to people and hiring is so challenging to do and the cost of people have gone up considerably, do you have those situations planned for? And then once you have that, are you able to then communicate to your leadership not only the results of what you've come up with, but the constraints that you'll have. So if this event happens, here's what that means to our business. You know, if we could continue to retain our people, here's what that means to our business. For my past, it was people, it was product, it's supply chain. Those are some things that were very critical elements. Make sure you're measuring and looking at those things that are critical to your business. On the next slide, then if you're thinking about like, okay, those all make sense from a process and from a capability standpoint, then like why technology? I'm going to go back to yesterday. I was watching, they were having a person with Congress talking about CrowdStrike and what happened there. So you've got to have a secured environment. You've got to have confidence that your information is in that one version of truth in a very secured, not only externally, but internally. If you're going to be making tough decisions on hiring or downsizing, you don't want that to be common information across your organization. You want to be able to automate the different parts of your business. So tying it into a workforce so that I can have a system go calculate out what generally my largest expense to my business is. What happens if I have a decrease in my workforce? What happens if I have to go give union contract raises or I have to do something across my workforce? So automation is going to be critical. With that comes the flexibility to do this often. So many of you are saying Excel is something that prohibits you from being flexible and being able to do this. Technology is going to allow you to have that flexibility, that automation, so that you can do this and ultimately spend more of your time learning and being prepared for the conversation. It's also interesting that a lot of these organizations, there is a scalability issue, meaning if I'm going to go add a business, that's not an easy thing to do, no matter what you're using. So Excel or any other platform, you've got to just make sure you've got the thing that's going to grow with you. So if you need to go to a lower level of granularity, if you're in a consumer product good and you need to start planning at a SKU level, do you have something that can give you that capability without hindering you too much? And then ultimately, I know you guys all know this, but Excel is not a good production tool, not for something like scenario planning. Go Google Excel errors in finance, and it'll probably scare you to death because the human element is always going to be there. Excel just doesn't really give you that thing that's particularly secure. It's not, typically it's error prone, which challenges that we have through and through. And we go to the next slide, then what we can do is talk about what the end goal is. We at Planful think pretty highly that planning, forecasting, it's a team sport. So I would want to get more people involved. There's a lot of knowledge in your organization, have more scenarios, sit and have those conversations, communicate, and that does go back to our first polling question of is it going to, or the first discussion question of does it require a mindset change? Absolutely, because you're going to have to ask people to think about the business a little different. You're going to need to look at the business through the eyes of change. So we know business is going to change. We know the environment, the economy. We know the world is changing, and it's changing faster and faster every year. We need to be prepared for that. We need to store and have that information so that you can actually compare what are you learning. It's okay in this world, like we're going to need to fail because that's where we're learning. uh, let's be honest, if we knew all the answers, we wouldn't have to do scenarios. You just do one and you're finished, but that's not the world we live in. So learn, try to be prepared for all the things that are going to come, and move forward. From there, then let's go report what those options can be. And then let's communicate that, and let's make sure that we have good, strong communication across our organization. So this can be from low level continuous planning, rolling forecasts, as Melinda had said. Totally support that. I think that's a great idea. And then the ultimate goal here is increase that forecast accuracy, reduce the variability to what you think is going to happen and what does happen. So technology is going to enable those processes. And at the end of the day, the scenarios is going to give you different views of your business. And I've got a couple examples here. The next slide, um, some people are visual. I'm a visual person. I like to be able to see major components of my business. I like to see, in this case, how are my actuals tracking? How am I tracking compared to last year? Long range plans. Sometimes those are so far in advance that I would expect those to be considerably off from maybe where your actual business is. But then as you get into annual operating plans, rolling forecasts, you want to see where your major categories are and what are the things. It'll help you identify those areas that you really need to spend more time on. So maybe you figured out the sales side of it, but maybe your supply chain side is a problem. It's pretty unusual that you have problems throughout the organization. Usually it's a couple of major areas. And let's say you're the kind of person who likes a lot of data. On the next slide, we'll kind of give it to you in more of a numeric, where instead of it just being visual, let's go look at the numbers. In this case, let's go look at some different scenarios of my product and selling of those products. What happens if supply chain is such a problem like we had, and I can't get the goods to actually manufacture the finished good? You need to be able to adjust for that. What if you have new product launches, or what if you need to retire products that just have been underperforming? So in this case, technology is going to allow you to have these different scenarios, be able to look at that information both visually and in more of a numeric analytic, and do that at whatever level is going to be most meaningful for you and your organization to manage your process and manage your business. So with that, Hans, I'm going to hand that back to you, and be interested to see what questions there are.
Brilliant, Ben. Thank you very much for that great presentation, and thank you for sharing those two snapshots. It's visual, and of course it's stabilized, and it shows the power of technology end to end as to what can happen and how beneficial it is to have it on a platform rather than Excel. So thank you very much for that. Let us move to your question to the other panelists. Very quickly, panelists, if you can join us. And ladies and gentlemen, as mentioned before, please keep sending your questions. We will answer some of them live and some of them, the rest of them via email. So the question is, what is next on your organization scenario management journey, to our panelists themselves? So Massimo, if I can come to you, please.
Sure, thanks. Where are we? I guess we are quite far on the subject of strategic scenario planning, what I defined before as the longer term view, and elaborating that. And I think we are trying to move backwards into the other phases of short-term financial operational scenario management, where we need to cascade what we've done at the strategic level. I think that's next challenge, which is basically means involving the rest of the organization, getting out of the C room and involving the rest of the organization into the process.
Fantastic. Thank you very much. Milind, what will your thoughts be on this question? Where are you heading?
So my next I'm not sure if I think about as much from an organization perspective versus what I would like our overall team to do. I think the one thing I do want our team to do is to be more engaged. So to ask more questions, to sort of uh, define, does it mean this? Does it mean that? What exactly do you need? I feel like sometimes as we engage the broader team, I don't know if there's enough debate around it. Does this scenario do A, B, and C? Is this what is assumed? I feel like asking the questions, having that debate up front actually leads to much better outcomes. So to me, that's probably the first step I'd love to get. Yeah, I'd love to sort of dive into a little deeper with the organization.
Brilliant answer there. And Ben, summing it up, what were your thoughts?
Yeah, we drink our own champagne over here, so yes, we're, we do forecasting quite often, but I think the thing for us that's really big now is the AI ML world. So we're trying to get comfortable with the idea of AI and ML not being a black box, just giving me numbers, but really trying to get more into the analytical side of the business and not spend as much time doing, which would be kind of the artificial intelligence, the machine learning. Let that help us generate what it can look with trends, removing highs and lows and those strange anomalies. Let us get more into the analysis of the business and really start telling the story. So I think it really is using that technology so that we can stop becoming the best Excel accumulator or number accumulator and really know our business, drive our business, explain the business.
Brilliant answers there. Thank you very much, panelists. Let us, in the essence of time, let us jump very quickly to our key takeaway session. Panelists, if you can very quickly give me one concluding point that you would like to leave our audiences for on scenario management. Massimo, what would your one concluding point be?
How could I summarize this? Think big, but act in small steps. Probably would be.
Fantastic point there. Milind?
I would say engage the organization, have the dialogue, make sure you keep the communication. Don't just send emails to people saying, I need A, B, and C. Engage people, have discussions, make sure people buy into the process. The more people buy into the process, the better the output is.
Fantastic. And finally, Ben?
Yeah, Hans, you asked for one. I'm going to give you two, but I'll keep it short. So, first one is it's a team sport. Get everybody involved, lots of smart people in your organization. And then the second piece is it's progress over perfection. This is not a grade. We don't worry about the destination, it's the journey that you're taking. So,
Absolutely spot on there, panelists. So thank you very much for that. And ladies and gentlemen, keep sending your questions. We now go to our Q&A session. So unfortunately, we have time for just one question for each panelist, but we will answer all the other questions via email directly to you. So first one goes to Massimo. Massimo, you talked about, the importance of driver-based planning and identifying your drivers. Why such a small amount of drivers, not 10, not 20? What your thoughts and your experience, please, on this?
I think my thoughts went in the same direction as what Ben said before. Try to focus your energy on what really matters. Of course, there's a multitude of things that affect us every day, and private life, company life, but try to concentrate on those that can really make a difference. That's why I'm saying concentrate on those three. If you get those three right, I think you've done 80% of the job. Again, I quote Ben, if I may, try not to be perfect, but good enough.
Yeah, it's always that 80-20% rule, isn't it?
Yeah.
20% of the drivers that move 80% of your results at the end of the day. And of course, if you start looking at all the drivers, you will be there forever. The
Correct.
event will change, things will happen, new events will come, so it's never going to get anywhere. So thank you for that, Massimo. Our second question, of course, is to Milind. Milind, thank you for your fantastic presentation. what is there any key skill sets that people need to develop to do a good scenario planning, or within the team? Any training required? What are your thoughts?
I would say try and understand your business as best you can and partner with the business, have regular conversations with them so you understand the linkage of drivers. Don't be afraid to pick up the phone and engage other people in your team as well. Pick up the phone, have a call. I would keep harping on engage people across the organization, not just in finance. Make sure the business is engaged as well. And the business has a pretty vested interest in helping FP&A and helping finance sort of walk through the implications. So, in my experience, the business is quite happy to engage. So, don't be afraid of that engagement. Lean into it, and then make sure you think through whether the existing models you have work for the scenario you've got. So it's really important for you to not just run a scenario, but think through, make sure that that scenario is applicable to your model. Don't just think about changing, a driver in your model. Think about whether it applies, and then how would you tweak it if needed.
Oh, brilliant! A brilliant answer there, Milind. Thank you very much. Thank you very much. And we go to Ben for the final question of this afternoon, evening, or morning for some people. Ben, absolutely, we know a lot of people still use Excel, and one of the question is, how do we then move from Excel to a solution like yourself? What is the best route?
I would give advice that I would give to every single potential customer I talk to every day, every week. It's crawl, walk, run. It's about progress. It's if you try to bite off too much, your implementations become overwhelming. Back to the question of how many drivers, you get overwhelmed. You want to minimize your risk and you want to pick things where you can get quick wins. So I don't think you have to just disband Excel. We're not in the business to do that. I still use Excel on a daily basis. It's really trying to figure out how can I move the meter? How can I make progress? So I don't think it has to be the conversation of, oh my gosh, I have to go replace everything. Start simple, start with some people, start with your OPEX expenses, start with a revenue plan, and in time, develop a roadmap of what you want the bigger picture to be. So you don't have to go bite off the entire thing at one time.
Absolutely. And of course, some organizations have built their model. They are multi-dimensional, they are cross
Correct.
geographies, they are everything else, but they've put a lot of effort and time into working it bit by bit by bit by bit to reach to a point where, it is like that. So fantastic answer again, panelists. Thank you all very much for answering those questions and the insight. Let us just quickly now move through our last few slides. Please stay on the camera. So what have we got on next in terms of events? We've got navigating XP&A with the FP&A Trends Maturity Model. That is a great one for 9th of October. 23rd of October, we have the power of FP&A storytelling. And then finally, 6th of November, data visualization. So please come and join us for these webinars. Put it in your diary. Ladies and gentlemen, it is that time of the night or morning or afternoon where I say a big, massive thank you to our technology sponsor, Planful, for making this happen. So thank you very much, Planful. Thank you very much to Milind, Massimo, and Ben for all the time they've put into this. Their great insight, their fantastic presentations. Thank you very much, panelists. And finally, thank you to all of our audiences and our FP&A people that have joined us from 46 different countries around the world for making time. I hope this has been really beneficial to you as much as been to our panelists and ourselves as well. And now, this is how you can keep in touch with us. So please do link with us, watch the YouTube channel, come to our website, but also touch base with our panelists as well. Now, just before I close the meeting, let me remind you, there will be a survey session that pops up when I close the meeting. We want to hear from you. Tell us how we did, but also tell us what topic you would like to hear from us in the next session. Well, from us all, Ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much for attending. A very good morning, good afternoon, and good evening from us. Until we see you next time, have a great one. Thank you very much. Bye-bye now. Bye.